They died off the coast of Libya trying to reach Europe, packed into a boat that most people would be afraid to climb into. They weren't the first migrants to die this way, they won't be the last. So why aren't governments doing more to protect these people? And what are the politics at play? This is Inside Story. Hello, welcome to the programme. In Doha, I'm Adrian Finigan. 400 migrants were feared dead on Monday after a vessel sank near the coast of Libya, the second such incident in a week. The bodies of at least 36 migrants were recovered off the coast of Tripoli on Sunday. They were thought to be African migrants who drowned when their boat sank 2 days ago. Dozens more people are still missing. Libya has become a prime location for tens of thousands of migrants, and the government there is now urging Europe to do more to help it deal with the issue. Al Jazeera's Omar Al-Salah has more from Tripoli.
Another attempt to reach Europe, another tragedy, followed by the bodies of dozens of would-be illegal immigrants being retrieved from the open sea. Libya's Coast Guard and police patrol searching for more bodies. The final death toll is unclear. The Libyan Navy says the incident happened on Friday when a boat carrying 130 illegal immigrants from different African countries sank east of Tripoli. It says 52 people were rescued then and over 74 were missing. But the spokesman insists only 20 bodies were found. Health officials say they need help.
We have 48 dead bodies in coroner's vans and there is no hospital to receive them. I call upon Ministry of Health to find a hospital morgue, and I also call upon Ministry of Justice to allow us to bury the dead bodies directly. The corpses on the seashore are causing pollution, environmental problems and disease.
Libya has appealed for help from the European Union to curb the flow of illegal immigrants. The country is in chaos after the fall of Muammar Gaddafi's regime. The government is struggling to rein in well-armed, powerful militias. It lacks the resources to protect the vast border it shares with 6 countries and a coastline of more than 1,700 kilometers. This country is a transit point for migrants. Once caught, some will be detained and others set free. The interim government says it is not only Libya's problem and the European Union needs to do more.
Well, Europe's high standard of living, generous welfare systems and free movement rights make it an attractive destination for migrants from across Africa. This is the journey that many of them take in search of a new life, travelling from places such as Nigeria, Ghana and Senegal, north to the coastal cities of North Africa. The ones closest to the European mainland make for the easiest trip across the Mediterranean, so most immigrants leave from Morocco, Tunisia and, as we saw, Libya. Once they make it to Europe, they usually end up in southern Spain, Italy and Malta. Well, Libya's interim interior minister says that Tripoli actually will begin to help migrants reach Europe unless Libya receives support from the continent. Salah Mazak warned EU states that if they do not shoulder the responsibility with us, the state of Libya could facilitate the quick passage of this flood of people through Libya, since God has made us a transit point for this flood. He added, Libya has paid the price, now it's Europe's turn to pay. Well, let's bring in today's guests. From London, we're joined by Jonathan Birdwell, who is the head of the Citizens Programme at Demos. Also in London, Claude Moraes, Labour member of the European Parliament, and in Brussels, Bernd Hemingway, who is the Regional Director for the European Economic Area, EU and NATO at the International Organisation for Migration. Claude Moraes, we'll start with you as a sitting member of the European Parliament. Who is ultimately responsible for protecting immigrants heading to Europe and asylum seekers? Current EU policy says that the country in which a person first arrived is responsible for dealing with them, but that does seem to place an intolerable burden on southern European nations.
Well, under international law, it's very clear that the European Union states where asylum seekers and trafficked people arrive are responsible, and that's clear in international law. And the reality is that this situation in Libya is not really new. The particular example of those push factors can be exacerbated and can be new, but what is happening in the Mediterranean is not new. And the real problem is that across the European Union, in terms of responsibility, there are many policies. The European Union has got asylum reception conditions directives, and it has assets in the Mediterranean. There are very progressive policies. In fact, even in the last few years, there's an asylum package legislated just in the last few months in the European Union. That's not the problem. The problem is that the push and pull factors are going to exist, and individual member states in the European Union are not getting together and are not asserting their policies and their resources in relation to these push and pull factors. And in the long term, partnerships with those countries are opportunistic generally. They're not based on long-term development. And then when these flashpoints, like the Libyan flashpoint, happen, we tend to be very much disabled in the European Union.
Okay, Bernd Hemingway, does a European-wide asylum system exist? Is there a coordinated policy that sets out just who has what responsibility for dealing with migrants? And if there isn't, why?
Well, there is a clear set European asylum policy, and member states have agreed together with the Parliament to set up such a European-wide asylum system. The system works as much as responsibility is shared, and we heard already that the country of first arrival is also the country of the asylum claim, so that seems to be regulated. However, I also would like to kind of extend maybe a little bit also on the responsibilities of the countries of origin and the countries of transit, because this is all a flow that starts in sub-Saharan Africa and then goes via North Africa to the European Union. And I think we have to share a lot more responsibilities and help each other, and finger pointing in that probably does not help in that respect.
Okay, we'll come back to that issue again in just a moment. First of all, Jonathan Birdwell, is a comprehensive approach to immigration even possible in Europe today, given the political landscape, the political fragmentation that exists, the rise of far-right and nationalist anti-immigration parties in Europe?
I think any kind of common immigration policy is going to be extremely difficult to achieve. And as we've seen, we have seen the rise of far-right parties, populist parties who tend to, focus on immigration as their key issue. They often pass blame onto the European Union, and there's two issues really. There's immigration within the European Union, and then of course there's the question of immigration from outside of the European Union, as in this case. And I think in both instances, the European Union is struggling to come to terms and come to some kind of agreement that can see somehow recognizing the burden that countries such as UK or Germany or France, which tend to take in the most immigrants and tend to be the destinations that are most desirable to immigrants, is there a way to accommodate their concerns within the common framework? I think that is the big question that the European Union will be really struggling to answer in the next 2 years at least.
Bernd Hemingway, I want to come back to the issue we started to discuss just a moment or two ago. How seriously do you think will Europe's politicians, or should Europe's politicians, take the threats of the Libyan interior minister that the country will actually begin to assist migrants with their Mediterranean passage if Europe does nothing to help?
Yeah. No, I think that European politicians take, and especially those in government, take the collaboration with Libya and other countries in Northern Africa very, very seriously. And I just recall there's been recently signed mobility partnerships between the European Union member states, or some of them, and Morocco and Tunisia. So I think what all are crying out for, and what we have to achieve is this collaboration, and to help also the Libyan government to build up those capacities to deal with this governance of the reception and of the dealing with this migratory flow that uses Libya as a transit country to the European Union.
All right, let's pick this up with Claude Moraes then. Immigrants, Claude, are making extremely hazardous journeys across open water, packed into inappropriate vessels in their desperation to reach Europe and a better life. How can the EU partner more effectively with North African states, even the sub-Saharan states, that these people are coming from to prevent or to dissuade migrants from making the journey?
Well, of course, I mean, that's right, that some of these mobility partnerships are taken very seriously. Unfortunately, I've been in the European Union for some years now. I've seen how opportunistic many of these so-called partnerships are done and are pieced together. And it's very often in a very political way. And what I mean by that is that you do not do this just over a few months. You have to deal with the development of a country and understand that this is not just about the betterment of the European Union, it's about the betterment of those countries and ensuring that you deal with the poverty push factors as well over time. These are many countries that have been post-colonial countries with post-colonial situations where we have been involved in those countries. So I think that's a situation that we need to tackle. Of course, there's the immediate urgency in the Mediterranean. Now, the European Union has assets like Frontex, like the Asylum Support Office in the Mediterranean. We have very good policies like asylum reception conditions. But for these to work, and indeed on burden sharing and resettlement policies, but for these to work well, as Jonathan I think implied in his comments, you need real will amongst member states, and you need a sort of common policy to work. The reason that common policy isn't working is because within those member states there's a lot of resistance to these kinds of common immigration or common asylum policies. So, politicians at member state level don't want to talk about it, they don't want to put resources into it, and for that reason you see countries like the UK, France taking a lot of asylum seekers, but not in a combined calm, strategic way through resettlement, for example, and that's the problem. The problem is there is resistance at national level for this to be a good common policy to deal with a very urgent situation in the Mediterranean.
So what you're saying is this isn't Europe's fault, it's the individual EU states that are at fault here?
That is Europe. What is Europe? I mean, this is obviously an absurd question very often. Europe is its member states, some of the wealthiest, most influential countries in the world. And what they tend not to do is, I think Jonathan said this very skillfully as well, they tend to sometimes blame the European Union. You can see why they do it. The European Commission, the European Parliament come up with very good, decent policies like asylum reception conditions, like Frontex and all the rest of it. And of course, when it doesn't work, they say that's Europe's fault. In fact, it's the fault of those big member states not getting together and not planning medium and long-term policies. Remember, we've been trying to piece together an asylum policy for the Mediterranean since the 1980s. So this has been going on for a long time. And when these big flashpoints like Libya happen, they've been a long time in the making. So I think we have to say that the responsibility, yes, on the sending countries to get their act together, but trafficking and so on need a much bigger response from the big countries. But the policies at EU level, of course, there are many asylum policies in place. Are they being implemented? No.
Okay. All right. We'll look into why in just a moment. But first, the European Union came under a lot of pressure to change its immigration policy following the Lampedusa tragedy that killed over 360 people. Now, many attempts have been made to form a common European policy on immigration, but as we were hearing, it's an issue on which member states are often unwilling to surrender too much power to Brussels. Southern European countries say that they're taking the burden of dealing with the continent's illegal immigrants. One idea raised after Lampedusa was an EU rescue mission fronted by the Union's border agency that would track, identify and rescue boatloads of migrants coming to Europe. Other nations have taken border controls back into their own hands. Greece built a heavily fortified fence along part of its border with Turkey, which it says is responsible for a major drop in illegal immigration. Jonathan Birdwell, to what extent does immigration have to do you think, with the rise of, in popularity of far-right politicians and parties, nationalist parties in Europe?
Absolutely. I mean, it is the key driver. We've been at the think tank Demos especially been interested in online supporters of these groups, and they've also been using social media in a very effective manner to spread their propaganda, which often includes issues around immigration. And we did a survey of the online supporters of these groups, and immigration was the top concern cited among supporters of these groups. Now, it's important to say, I think, if you look at the data, it suggests that although they're using immigration as a scapegoat for economic concerns, there are economic issues, I think, at play in terms of their own language, in the way in which they rationalize support for these groups. It's often a cultural identity that they stress as their main reason for opposition towards immigration. So I think it's definitely the key driver of support for these groups like Geert Wilders in the Netherlands, Front National in France, UKIP in the UK, which all three are leading the polls in the European elections.
And what are the impacts of that on European immigration, or what will be the impact of that in the future as more far-right and nationalist politicians win seats in the European Parliament?
I think that's a really interesting question. I'm sure Claude can answer it much better than me. But you know, I think the rise. They're projecting that the share of seats within the European Parliament among these kind of anti-immigrant, xenophobic groups is approximately about 21%. But they suspect that that's going to rise to 30%. Will that be enough for them to have a significant influence over European legislation with respect to immigration? I think that question. Well, that's, I think, best answered by Claude, really. But I think that is the big question mark. After this election, you know, I think these groups in particular can make a lot of trouble with respect to immigration policy at the European level.
Let's put that to Claude. And I know that Bernd wants to come in on that as well. But Claude?
Yeah, if I may, this next Parliament could be a very difficult Parliament in which you're going to have any progressive legislation and partnerships which would help this situation. You're going to have more, we don't know exactly how much, but we're going to have more Tea Party style, you know, or far right or right leaning parties elected. And I think the problem with that is it's going to create the type of atmosphere which will not be conducive to progressive policies to try and fix this very tough short and long-term problem. And I think the issue for us is that despite many centre-right governments and far-right politicians already in Europe, we've managed to have some progressive asylum policies. And my worry is that there'll be even more pressure on the Council, that's the Member States, not to do anything on asylum, but just to wring their hands when we see the problems in the Mediterranean, have crocodile tears when we see reports on Al Jazeera and everywhere else. But in reality, will they do anything? That's my real worry in relation to the elections coming up.
Bernd, the treatment of and responsibility for asylum seekers, refugees and illegal immigrants already causes a lot of friction between EU member states, particularly between northern and southern countries. What hope then for a progressive asylum policy will there be if, as we were saying here, Claude is particularly concerned about it, there continues to be a rise of nationalist and far-right parties within the EU Parliament?
No, I think we have to give also Europe a little bit of the benefit of the doubt. I mean, at the end of the story, the common asylum and migration policy is a very young policy in the European Union. We only started in 1999 with the development of a program and of such a common policy. And from that perspective, we have achieved already a lot. But what we will see probably, and what I find a little bit sad, is we will see a lot of more emotional discussions in the future about migrants, and in particular of those people who are against migration. And then those people who try to argue in favor of migration, they always use very, very technical arguments, and then losing out on the communication level with those people. So the kind of political, technical discussions will be a lot more difficult in the future, because the perception of migration will be even increased. That's at least my my expectation, to be more emotional than it has been in the past.
Jonathan, there are two different issues at play here in this debate, aren't there? There's the issue of immigrants who are already in Europe, whether they are legal or not, and there are the immigrants who are trying to get to Europe, some of whom tragically meet their demise making that journey.
Absolutely. I think the debates tend to focus on, I think, you know, when we do see these really horrible, tragic incidents like this, we do focus on actually the plight of migrants trying to get into Europe. And of course, there's a lot of focus on this in Italy and in Greece, which are the southern European countries where tend to be the first points of entry. But I think in terms of the debate in the UK and probably elsewhere in kind of Western Europe, it actually tends to be more on, I think, the migrants that are already here and issues around integration of those migrant populations. That, I think, is also a big issue. And of course, the two are connected. But I think UKIP and Front National and parties like Freedom Party focus a lot on the integration of migrant populations, and in particular, migrants from Muslim majority countries. And of course, I think we've seen a surge of migrants trying to get into Europe, in large part due to conflicts like the Syrian civil war. So I think they will connect the two. But there's interesting differences emerging between the groups. You know, Nigel Farage says the UK should do more to actually accept Syrian refugees, whereas Marine Le Pen is saying that we don't want any Syrian refugees in France. So some interesting differences emerging within those groups.
And as far as Claude Moraes, as far as immigrants trying to reach European shores, why aren't NGOs putting more pressure on the EU to do something about the terrible toll that's been taken?
Well, I mean, NGOs play an incredibly important part in this, and they're on the front line and they do play a very important role. But very often, NGOs can also get government funding. They can be, part of the agency response, and it's very hard sometimes for them to speak out as often. And it's very important for politicians to do their job, for think tanks and others to do their job and speak as independently as possible. And I think the really important task here is to call everyone to account. Very often in this area of asylum, it's important to understand that these policies are not vote winners.
Okay.
They're about dealing with a group of people that will not win votes, but it will enhance what the European Union is about, what Europe is about, to deal with vulnerable people for the long term.
Okay.
And it's about getting that right for the betterment of everyone.
Well, of course, it's not just Europe that's been criticised for its treatment of migrants. Australia has also come under scrutiny for its policy towards these people. They come mainly from Afghanistan, Sri Lanka, Iraq, Iran, travelling in boats from Indonesia. The government introduced controversial measures to deal with them, deciding to process migrants in detention camps in Papua New Guinea. Conditions in these camps have been condemned by the UN and rights groups. Asylum seekers are also often left there rather than repatriated when their applications are rejected. And in January this year, there were reports of the Australian Navy turning boats of asylum seekers back to Indonesia, something the UN called a breach of international law. Bernd Hemingway, what lessons does Europe have to learn on the treatment of immigrants from other parts of the world, Australia, for example, or even the US? Are we doing a better job, do you think, piecemeal though it may be, than the Australians and the Americans do with migrants?
Yeah. But I think what Europe tries to do is to put this all together in a very comprehensive way. And I don't say we're already there, but I think there is still a long way to go. But they try to include, and that also comes back to your last questions, of the role of NGOs. For example, I know that NGOs are involved with regards to the human rights monitoring of Frontex and of the European Asylum Support Office. So there is a cooperation on that. And I think also Europe kind of looks into the whole policy of what you could call humanitarian border management. So how to secure access of those in need of protection, and how to identify those in need of protection. So I think there is a constant kind of search for improvement, and also the states, the heads of states and government, after the Lampedusa tragedy, they tried to put kind of a program and a strategy together for the Horn of Africa, North Africa, and Europe. But that, of course, requires now preparation for implementation, and I think that's where we could get better in the whole implementation of all these policies that we put in place.
Gentlemen, there, I'm afraid we will have to leave it. Many thanks indeed to all of you. Jonathan Birdwell in London, Claude Moraes also in London, and Bernd Hemingway in Brussels. And please add your voice to our discussion. You can leave your comments at facebook.com/AJ Inside Story or tweet at AJ Inside Story on Twitter. In Doha, I'm Adrian Finigan. Thanks for watching. Bye-bye for now.